Hello, War of the Visions fans. I have heard you asking about a new video on the Veritas and the newer Veritas specifically, and unfortunately, I haven't played two of them as much. My emphasis on class match has only really been, my emphasis on like match battles has only been for like class match or limited. So I'm doing quick pick right now. I'll show you maybe some of that footage here. But one thing that I want to emphasize is that the Veritas units essentially kind of come in pairs. They do similar things, but from different ways, different perspectives. The first two pairs were more about damage. Veritas of the Heavens is just kind of like raw power. He's okay as a brawler, but like he just hits really hard is kind of the biggest, and in a large pattern is really one of his defining qualities. For Veritas of the Waters, she does a lot of things and she's very torn, but she's the magic side of this equation in that she has a lot of penetration, so she can have very consistent damage even against people who might resist her better. She's not as much of a damage heavy unit, but she does do a lot of things when she connects with people. So a lot more strategic, whereas one is a lot more blunt, one is magic, one is physical, but both of them are very offensive in a lot of ways. Then we have Veritas of the Earth, Veritas of the Flames. Veritas of the Earth is probably one of the better tanks in the game now. I want to say, as free units, these guys are usually just a little bit below top tier, but they've been pretty consistent about updating them. So for a lot of applications, they may be the third or fourth best unit possible, and Veritas of the Earth is really one of the better tanks that exists. And he heals himself so incredibly well, being a part of it. There are a lot of other good parts about him, but that heal also generates hate, so he just becomes an incredibly, like, the more he has to dig in as a tank, the more he attracts people to him. So he becomes like just this gravity well that sits on the field and just tanks everything. Meanwhile, Veritas of the Flame is a much more offensive character. He's also healing back a ton through his damage. There's a ton of ways for him to heal by doing damage, and a ton of ways for him to do damage besides and pump his own damage. So while, Veritas of the Earth is kind of like ultimately very defensive, Veritas of the Flames is ultimately very offensive, but the thing that unites the two is that they both have ways, offensive and defensive, of healing while doing a number of other things. So it's not just self-healing. With that background, we come into Veritas of the Frost and Veritas of the Bolt. I have talked about both these a little bit, but both in pretty incomplete forms, and I've completed both of these now and have a lot of thoughts about them. Veritas of the Frost is such an ice unit, but like a perfected ice unit in a way. There's this archetype within ice where there's a lot of glass cannons. They don't take damage very well, basically. However, they get what I think of as these icy shields. Like they develop a layer of ice in front of them to help with how squishy they are. And these shields often break very easily or very quickly, but they're often very powerful and powerful enough to mitigate a lot of that squishiness, which allows them to have potentially a lot of speed and a lot of power and have their stats focused there without having the drawback of being easy to remove from the field. Veritas of the Frost has a lot of ways to keep himself from dying. A lot of very automatic ways to keep himself from dying as well in the right scenario. Although I will say, using Veritas of the Frost effectively, he is going to be playing into physical teams. And we'll talk about why in a second, but I want to talk about the master ability, a little bit of slash resistance penetration. That's okay. Bit of accuracy, that's good. And his chance to apply curse goes up 15 if he has courage active, which he usually will. Dream ability gives him single target resistance and increased critical damage. So more damage, more resistance. So one thing that you should know about this guy is that he is incredibly fast. like definitely the fastest free character in the game, I think, and probably one of the fastest characters in the game, generally speaking. Master of Carnage is awesome. This is why he's so good into physical. He has essentially a whole double HP bar. I mean, I know 7500 isn't a full HP bar anymore, but like maybe in some cases it's only 50% more HP, but he has bonus HP in fights against physical to where he just won't take damage for a little while. This also provides slash, penetration, defense penetration, and attack. So this is the perfect trifecta of tank busting offense that we've been looking for so long, and the thing that takes it one step further, and the thing that makes it, top tier in terms of the way that these go, is that shield, because that shield is quite a powerful fourth effect, as these often get when they're upgraded. What you're adding to that, you have a number of options. You could really boost that defense penetration up quite a bit, even push the attack higher with Great Knight lore. One that really plays into his strengths really well is raising the agility 12% and giving him some initial AP. Now, because this character is so incredibly fast, he has a lot of ways to mitigate it within his kit, so maybe don't worry about it too much. But especially, I want you to understand why this is a better than it looks passive support skill on him. Because agility is always good, but he's going to burn through his AP potentially rather quickly. He has some ways to mitigate this, but giving him a good start is helpful. So that 20 initial AP is a little bit bigger for him, I think, than it is for some characters, especially alongside the agility boost, because that agility boost is going to make him need it even more. He's still one of the faster characters in the game even without this agility boost, but if you really want him to be fast, especially if maybe his equipment is letting him down, and we'll talk more about that later, this is a really great passive for him. I mean, I guess Deadly Mastery is okay, but I would rather get more defense penetration than more crit rate. Just because I think he's going to be pretty good into crit himself, but maybe putting even more crit rate on him is acceptable for you. Clairvoyant Slash is what I prefer here because it is a preemptive counter. It does decent damage, has pretty good range. So that's usually what I like. He also has the ability to give himself an additional counter effect, so this is a good one to stack with another one because you create like this damage sandwich. Either I take you out before you hit me, or I hit you first, then you hit me, then I hit you again for the privilege. So this is also straight up only into physical, so this is another thing that makes him a character that you really, actually all of, well no, Endura doesn't. If you want to be a little bit more general with him, and I don't necessarily encourage it, because I think that he's best when he stays in his lane, I do think Clairvoyant Slash is the best of them. He can decrease defense with his basic attacks, fairly short range. That's okay, I guess, but maybe you turn that off. Yaksha Sword Dance turns off all reactions to his skills for 4 turns. That's pretty powerful. That's pretty great. I like it. And it also gives him Burst Edge, which is that extra counter skill. So this is total counter domination from his perspective. Not only can you not counter him in any way, you can't reflex, you can't do anything about his skills. He, when you attack him, can counter before and after your damage. Have fun with that. Also, it gives him the ability to spell auto revive for 4 turns. So ultimately, because they seem very committed we're even seeing vision cards purchasable with the Veritas medals now. So they seem very committed to continuously give us reasons to use these units and continue to give us upgrades for them and through the system. So I think that it's important to look at the long term, because Curse, because of recent units and popular and strong units being often curse resistant, like Exia and Shurika just being a big deal right now, that he can't curse. Curse is going to come and go in its relevance, but the genie's out of the bottle essentially, and it's a matter of, does the meta require people to build for it? Now he's going to be around in the meta for a while, I would expect, maybe even outlasting Ramada and Sephiroth, so he's going to be an important question into the future. And he has the potential to sneak in and do some pretty cool stuff in a future meta where newer units don't have enough curse resistance to deal with his 40% with courage, and then you can really do some crazy things to them. But he has enough layers of denial within his additional abilities that you don't have to land curse, but it'd be a lot cooler if you did. And the fact that his kind of basic buff here, his self buff here, gives him Dispel Auto Revive for 4 turns is another example of that. Like, stopping re-raise is one of the better benefits of curse, and he just does it whether the curse lands or not. He just does it. And if they can seal that, then he can still curse them potentially and get around that. So really interesting there. I'm not going to talk much about triple execution. Silver Ray defense gets upgraded. This is buddy buff. Chain resistance for allies. Shell for allies. So finally we're getting some ways of mitigating magic damage for him. He gets courage. He gets decreased AP consumption. He gets decreased 15 critical resistance. And he gets hate down at 20% HP. Yep. So that's quite a lot. The hate down seems to be the newer part of that. That's interesting. I'm not sure how much I really like that effect, but it is interesting that it's there. Maybe that can keep him be another layer of ways that he can survive even on low health, because the more turns he can stay on the field as a glass cannon, the more havoc he can wreak. But the really important thing for him, as I alluded earlier, is dual demolition blade. There is a huge range to this. It's select 2 targets. They don't have to be anywhere near each other. Like, anything within this range he can hit. You can have somebody here and somebody here. He can hit them both. It's fine. It's going to dispel everything for them. It's going to decrease their single target resistance by 60%, which is itself already pretty huge. And it's going to hit with the 200% mod, which is pretty high damage. I mean, it's not like super high, but, you know, it's considerable. It's a heavy hit. And then from there, it has a 25% chance to inflict curse, or 40% if you have courage active, and you probably do. This is enough to get around some of the basic resistances, or maybe some of the basic equipment to resist curse. Not super reliably, but it does give him the chance to do that if people aren't specifically building to the 50 or 40 thresholds, which they would if curse was a lot more popular. Asura Cross Cleave is only a 200% mod. It is a plus AoE, so it's not huge. It does break physical barriers for him, so that can be important. He can also, within his sub-job, hit with a very close to himself, but with a 320 mod, which is crazy. There is a time delay on this attack too. Just pointing that out. It's a strange one, but it's potentially very powerful. I guess if they don't move. Maybe if they move out of the way, that could be really bad. Bereaving Blade. 165 mod isn't high. Decrease healing power 40 is fairly crippling for units that really rely on their healing power. It's okay. Great Knight seems really good. It gives him another way to decrease ice resistance. We'll talk about the other one later. It also gives him the ability to dispel AP auto restore for himself and allies, so he can get the whole team in on that. Although this is the only thing this buff does, and that may not be the thing that you want in your buff rotation. You can also potentially silence, and this gives another skill. Great Slash is really similar to Asura Cross Cleave. It's just a little bit weaker. Lancer doesn't really have anything that makes me happy. So let's get to the Limit Burst. Decrease ice resistance by 38%, so that's going to be higher than the Great Knight skill. 3 turns for targets. Cross-shape AoE. Little bit of range, nothing crazy. It is a 2-hit skill though. 240 mod hits fairly hard. It also grants him AP auto restore. So if you're thinking about this, you can potentially give him a higher AP start. Then his initial buffing pattern is going to give him AP cost down, which means that he's probably going to keep more of his AP so he can keep going for a while. And then, if he ever well, I mean, he needs the 43 AP to activate this, but if he ever gets to his LB and really has to tear into people, then he mitigates that high cost by getting AP auto restore for the next couple of turns, which keeps him going. So in a way, you could think of this guy as having just incredible AP stamina through these three things that are gonna like play out throughout the match to keep him at a level of sustainability. This is what I mean by like he's a very highly optimized ice unit, because he has all of those kind of archetypal ice elements that we're used to seeing in the design of ice characters, including probably like an explosion in his limit burst. I don't remember. He needs more fire to be stereotypical ice unit, but but in a very optimized way. And I think he's very powerful if you use him correctly, because he is a katana himself. He is a honed, sharp, just brutal edge. So next we have Veritas of the Bolt. I recently realized that I could fully reincarnate her. It's pretty quick. It's one of the benefits of these characters. They don't take a ton of resources to build and reincarnate, just kind of time and patience. And, you know, these, her and Earth are probably the easiest to build without realizing it, because you're probably participating in guild battle whether you do these other forms of stuff or not. And as long as you pay some level of attention to that, you should be getting these rewards basically on a daily basis at a pretty decent level if you're in a higher level guild. If you're not, come on, join Silkus. We probably have better rewards than your guild, hopefully. So you probably have this character or the ability to unlock this character, even if you think maybe you didn't. Same goes for Earth. And she's pretty good. She is a high range unit in a way that Veritas of the Light isn't, and we'll talk about her in the future. But from my experience with her, she has basically two modes. She's a modal character. A lot of what she does in any mode is very general in a way that makes her very compatible with other units, but maybe, if I'm being honest, limits her overall power in a way, because she doesn't stack a lot of things. Instead, she goes for being applicable to all people, whereas Veritas of the Frost was very versus physical. She's very general in a lot of ways. Her two modes are going to be regarding if you have her in Supplicant or not. Is she going to be more of a damage dealer? Is she going to function like a Laia Rundle? Or is she going to function more like a support that will turn into damage when they start to get in range? And which of those two Veritas of the Bolt you want depends on who else is on your team. Basically, if you have a better support on your team, you don't want her supporting, you want her to go for damage, you want her supported. Supported. Why did I say that weird? So she's going to get some extra AP for her start from her master ability. A little extra critical damage to help her skills be impactful. And also, general protection from larger AoE skills, 15% reduction. And that's going to be really helpful. Like, AoE resistance and this type of resistance are more important for long range units, because the longest range skills are ones that combine both natural range and AoE size. So often AoEs hit the back row units more often, even if it's just like with splash damage, and that makes this a really good form of resistance for a ranged character. Her stats aren't incredibly impressive, but they are pretty good. Sharpshooter bow skills is pretty good. Yeah, I really love seeing decreased movement on these type of units. It helps maximize the number of turns that they can attack without being attacked, which is really helpful for them because she's very squishy. She's very squishy in a very similar way to Veritas of the Frost. I feel like that's their similarity. They're both glass cannons in some way, except that kind of like the difference between Folka and Sid, Veritas of the Heavens, she isn't a specialist, she's more of a generalist. So in a way, she's also kind of a foil to Folka, in a way that I guess Veritas of the Frost is a foil to Veritas of the Heavens. Anyways, what I'm getting at here. So anyways, Sharpshooter bow skills. Decreases her movement, gives her more turns to be able to act with impunity despite her being squishy, because she isn't going to get nearly the same amount of barriers that Veritas of the Frost does, although we'll talk a little bit more about those later. Range also, having range 2 specifically, very good. Very good. This is going to give her a better range than Veritas of the Light as well. Important to kind of keep that note. And then if we're looking for a penetration package, we have 40 spirit penetration. She can boost this more herself in the fight. So this is a good one to have base, because it's very easy for her to get high spirit penetration with her buff rotation. Then what do we add with this? Well, AoE resistance, like I said, very good for her. Critical evasion, I'm not sure I'm as excited about that stat ever showing up, but I guess it's okay here. Thunderstorm Caller, magic, and missile attack resistance penetration. If you want to have the old school damage trifecta of 2 penetrations and a boost for your raw power, then combining Thunderstorm Caller and Sharpshooter bow skills gets you that. Those are for her job. If you are running her more as a support, Supplicant Intuition can be pretty cool for increasing the speed of her skills, but also how long they last. But I think I would ignore probably the Red Mage stuff entirely, and probably just stick with her passives. Shelter Step is reflex. You take that. Take that. Let's take a break for a second to go over the limit burst. This is going to give 38% missile resistance down, yet another way that you can penetrate that. An AoE with pretty decent range, but it's just a plus shape, so it's not huge. It is 58 AP, so it is rather expensive, but it's a 240 mod, so this is going to hit pretty hard. The cool thing here, and it's good that this is in AoE and not a single target, it could have been a bigger AoE. We've seen characters that could do this closer range with a bigger AoE, but it does have a 67 chance to inflict stun, and stun I think is one of those things that you really like in the context of ranged units, because anything that can give you that just one more turn to chain them down and beat them is great. And stun is pretty cool in that it usually gets a pretty high modifier, which means that people have to have a very high and very intentional resistance to it for it to not affect them at all. And if they have no resistance, it's very likely to affect them to begin with. So compare that to like stop or paralyze. They're likely to disable a unit, well, disable too. They're likely to disable a unit for usually around 3 turns. And you might think that stun is rather weak. However, it's a lot harder to mitigate entirely, and it's a lot more likely to happen if you have no mitigation at all. So you're trading, definitely getting 1 turn for maybe getting 3 with all of these other techniques. And that's something that's been pretty consistent for stun. And I do enjoy seeing more stun limit bursts. It's an interesting mechanic that certain teams can certainly capitalize, and range definitely has a chance to do this. But at other times, it's not game breaking. You can get around it. It's just a fun status that I like to see, and I like seeing it on her. Her small damage move is guaranteed hit, which, okay, I'm not mad at that. It's okay to be able to have a last resort, I guess. Static shield, you may not use this skill. I want to say, compared to Veritas of the Frost, who has a specific barrier against physical only, this is more general, even though it is a bit smaller. It makes her, again, squishier than him, but also a bit more of a generalist, so maybe it's slightly better. The thing is, it's on a buff, and a buff that you are much more likely to exclude from your rotation. So whereas you assume the Veritas of the Frost has a physical barrier, you don't necessarily assume the Veritas of the Bolt has a general barrier. It also decreases your chance of being targeted, which is pretty good for her. It's not a bad buff to work into your rotation. It's just, I think it's the most skippable of a lot of the things that she has, especially if you're going into Supplicant. You're adding that mainly for the extra buffs. This is the one that would fall out. If you're running her non-Supplicant, it may be a little bit more likely she gets the static shield up. Recovery piercing arrow is pretty cool. So this is going to break missile attack resistance by 40 before dealing damage. There aren't a ton of characters that have a ton of missile attack resistance, but this is a good just in case. And maybe more importantly, this is going to hit one person, 200 mod, pretty decent there. It's going to decrease their healing power by 70, which is pretty debilitating. That means you go from healing like 7,000 to healing like 400. You know, it really knocks down your healing power quite noticeably. You still get it, but it's almost insulting the amount of HP that you get back. So this is pretty debilitating, even though it only hits one thing. She has a lot of things in her kit that lean her more towards AoE, but anyways. Infinite Synchronized Bolts is her increased buddy buff. Unlike most buddy buffs, she gets the full diamond, which is pretty cool. And this is a good one to get your whole team in on because it has something for everybody. Defense and spirit penetration of 30 is, you know, good for basically anyone looking to do damage. It's going to give her auto revive. Great for her. It's going to give her AoE resistance penetration for 4 turns of 40. So this is why she prefers the AoE hits. 250 CT, which is a fourth of a turn and quite a lot for her, which should mean that this either gets her into her damage phase faster or it gets her through her buff rotation before people have like moved on from her a bit faster. It is also going to give her the effect for the next 4 turns of re-raise remove ceiling for 3 turns when she hits people on all of her effects. Given that she has re-raise and potentially you can use her to at range protect a bunch of other re-raise characters, like maybe running her with Luciel could be pretty cool. While I usually don't like these ceiling effects, I have to admit that when you put them on a ranged character that has this much range and primarily hits in these large AoEs that we're going to see in just a minute, I mean, she has a lot of potential to hit, at least ping an entire team and get this effect on them before your other characters have come in for damage, especially with the way that Infinite Synchronized Bolts boosts her into that next turn. Then we have Pursuit Piercing Storm. It's going to decrease critical evasion by 50 for 3 turns before dealing damage, so it's going to increase her chances of criticaling them. 200% modifier. This feels like the baseline for hard-hitting skills these days, so there we are. 100% hit chance, so this is an AoE answer to entire evasion teams, especially maybe in water. Evasion right now feels especially strong within Earth. That might be a little bit of a problem for her, but a lot of those Earth evasion teams also have follow-up hit. And she's going to dispel that for all of the targets in such an AoE pattern that this is just going to wipe that effect off of teams. Now, maybe characters like Ashe and Mont who get this effect a little bit later into the game after their LB might be able to work around this, but she can also hit them with this later game. This is, as it has the largest AoE, so it's most likely to catch multiple people, in that she also has AoE resistance penetration in her buff rotation, which is going to push her towards prioritizing this. This is going to mean this does more damage, even if it only catches one person, because she's got the appropriate penetration with it. So she's really going to prioritize this move, so she should be consistently using a guaranteed hit skill. So unless you have guaranteed hit avoidance, she's probably hitting you, at least pinging you with this, and she's consistently ensuring that you do not get more than one use of your follow-up hit. So this can be pretty good even into that Earth scenario, and it's probably going to be even better into a number of future evasion scenarios outside of the Earth element. Finally, Roaring Shock has a bit more range on it, even though it is just a plus-shaped pattern, so it's not a huge AoE, and it's only 165 mod, so she's not really going to like to use this in a lot of cases. However, it does dispel courage, so maybe in the case that someone can be taken out and has courage active, she'll use this to finish them off, where her other attacks wouldn't be able to, but outside of that scenario, I think this is really just a finisher for her. In her sub-job, she can, in a somewhat of an AoE pattern, it's a magic attack, interestingly, so her missile resistance penetration won't apply to this, but also this gives her an option outside of missile attacks as well, which could be a way of avoiding missile resistance too. This is going to, and this is similar to something that Veritas the Light has in her main kit. It's going to decrease agility though by 20%, which is pretty cool. Pretty not bad. Single target skill also with a lower modifier that inflicts confusion potentially. It's only a 25% chance. I wouldn't get too excited about this one. Yeah. I don't necessarily like that so much. That's what makes me lean more towards Supplicant, even though it doesn't have as much good stuff as I would want it to. Supplication is a pretty weak heal. Consecration of Water just doesn't feel strong unless you're in... Consecration of Water just doesn't feel strong unless you're in a specific match against water. And given that she's a lightning unit, you should have your work cut out for you already. It's just not something I really like. Divine Invocation is really strong though. This also increases like the trend of her being a generalist. Attack and magic of 40% and agility of 25%. That's two out of 3 of those are things that almost everyone is going to want. It's a little bit smaller than the buff pattern for her main job buddy buff, but this is more of the normal size for a buddy buff. That other one is a little bit of an outlier, and that's one of the things that makes it so good. Celestial Dyad can be interesting if you, in addition to getting around maybe missile resistance, you also want to get around lightning resistance. This is 185, select up to 2 targets, decent range. 185 mods, pretty respectable, but not top tier. Not even kind of baseline top tier, but it's elemental-less, or it's non-elemental magic damage. So this is going to get around a lot of the problems. You know, just kind of a coverage move for her. And then finally there's Rite of Refuge. This, in that it's a diamond AoE buff that increases AoE resistance and critical evasion by 20 for everyone in it. That's pretty good. I'm not saying that this is bad necessarily, but I think that a lot of the power in this buff is the 30% light and dark resistance, and I feel that that's really quite situational. If you are playing into that situation though, it's good. It's also better than Consecration of Water, that it hits more than just you. I mean, by the largest possible margin. It targets 2 elements, neither of which you already have an advantage into, and it does 2 other more relevant things beside. Also, this is another way of boosting your AoE resistance, which is again good for ranged characters like this. And then there's Red Mage, and I guess Fast Cast, but there's better buffs in Supplicant, and this... look, I'm not sold on anything in the sub-job. I'm... Really, maybe what you do is you either run her as a Supplicant, or you run her with her own sub-job but turn both of the skills off. I don't know, maybe Speed Piercing Vaults. That looks pretty good. I'm not gonna be too mad at that. That would, in theory, decrease someone's potential evasiveness too. Yeah, I guess Speed Piercing Vaults is worth running. Maybe not Nerve Jolt Arrow though. Let me, because this should be a pretty new card. Duet of Katana and Staff. So this is like the arena participation vision card, featuring the 2 units that can be picked up in arena. It has special bonuses for each of them. Both of them it's going to update to increasing AoE resistance penetration and single target resistance penetration, which is going to be great for both of them, modernizing them a lot. We're going to get AoE resistance, critical rate, and HP. That's okay. I'm not like mad at it. Only in arena, critical evasion. that makes sense. So it's a hollow VC that only works in arena, which is fair because it is the arena vision card. And it increases fire and wind resistance for any of the Veritas units in the party. Oh. So, okay. Theory craft with me here for a second. there's going to be 4 of these, right? Because they're each representing 2 of the characters. So if you're running 4 of these on your team, then you're getting resistances to like a bonus of 5 to 10 resistance to all elements on all the characters in your team, assuming they're all Veritas of all elements, which that could be pretty cool. I mean, it's cool to see, and I'm assuming that it's listed within the party effects. You have to max it, but it does have a special party effect just for the Veritas. I really like this. I'm not sure that this has ever been done before. This needs to be done for collaboration vision cards and stuff to make them a little bit better. But yeah, I look forward to seeing a lot more of these and seeing 4 of these in your 6 vision card slots, and potentially running like a 3-person Veritas team. Also, this one is going to line up with, as far as party effects, it's going to line up with, obviously, these 2, right? But it's also going to line up with our ranged Veritas in Veritas of the Light and Veritas of the Bolt. So it's going to provide some overlap between these characters and those characters. But also, I appreciate there being a little bit more support through this card for Devout Katana, specifically. It just makes it easier to splash a support onto a Katana team, which is often quite helpful. Anyways, thank you for listening. I know this has been a long one, but thank you for hearing me out. Remember to like and subscribe, or to support the channel, you can go to Amazon.com and check out my books. My name is Jackie Fox, and you can also find pages on Ko-fi and Patreon to support me with that name under that name as well. So no matter how you want to support the channel, even if it's just leaving a comment, do what you do. And with all that being said, I'll see you in the next one.